She thought her husband was dead. A drowning, a funeral, and then a stranger at the mall who promised her freedom. But what began as comfort turned into a deadly pact, one that would shatter her world. Because a year later, the man she buried walked back into town. Alive. And he wasn't here for revenge. He was here to watch everything fall apart. Let the story begin. Richard Pierce was the kind of man people in Willowfield, Pennsylvania, respected. He was steady, reliable, the sort of husband any woman would be proud to have. And for a time, Eleanor Pierce believed she was lucky. But luck has a way of running out. For the last 2 years of their marriage, Richard had turned cold. He barely spoke to her. He didn't yell, didn't fight. He simply froze her out. To Eleanor, it felt like he was punishing her for something she couldn't name. What she didn't know was that Richard had seen everything. It was a rainy night, nearly 3 years ago. Richard had come home early from a business trip. He walked down the hallway of their apartment building and stopped dead. Through the slightly open door, he saw Eleanor. She was laughing. Not with him. Another man was there, his hands on her waist. Richard didn't speak. He didn't confront her. He simply closed the door. The second time it happened, different man, same betrayal, he made his decision. Richard married her anyway. But from that day forward, he vowed she'd live in a prison of silence. He wouldn't leave. He wouldn't scream. He would simply stop loving her out loud. And Eleanor, trapped in a marriage she didn't understand, began to drown long before the night Richard did. It was a Thursday night when Eleanor wandered into Willowfield Mall, just to escape the oppressive quiet of her home. She sat in the food court with a coffee she didn't touch. That's when she saw him. Mark Rivers. Dark hair. Sharp suit. Calm blue eyes. He sat 2 tables away, watching her, not with pity, but with understanding. "Rough night?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her. Eleanor should have told him to leave. Instead, she stayed. Mark listened. He asked about Richard. He asked about her life. And when Eleanor, lonely and desperate, opened up, Mark leaned closer and whispered, "You know, I knew Richard once. Before you. He stole something from me. A contract. Millions. I swore I'd make him pay. And maybe now I can. You help me, I help you. Clean. Simple. Nobody will ever know." She laughed nervously, but Mark didn't. And for the first time in years, Eleanor felt seen. That was how it began. 2 weeks later, Mark's sister-in-law, Claire Rivers, was found bludgeoned to death in her driveway. 3 days after that, Richard Pierce's car was pulled from Miller's Lake. The police called it an accident. The town called it a tragedy. But Detective Julian Price didn't believe in accidents. Julian had been on the job 20 years. He knew when a story was too neat. His first suspect was Luke Pierce, Richard's cousin. Luke had been there the night Richard's car was found. He gave a statement so precise it sounded rehearsed. And when Julian pulled surveillance footage from the lake, Luke's truck was parked nearby. Luke claimed he was there looking for Richard. Julian didn't buy it. Luke became the prime suspect. But while the police chased the wrong man, Eleanor and Mark drew closer. Eleanor moved in with him. She even told herself it was love. And when she learned she was pregnant, she convinced herself it was fate. Luke, however, saw things differently. "You've got the wrong man," Luke told Julian. "Mark Rivers killed him. He's not here for Eleanor. He's here to bury Richard twice. Once in that lake, and once through her." Julian dismissed him, until he looked into Mark Rivers. And that's when he found it. Mark and Richard weren't strangers. Years ago, Richard had beaten Mark for a multi-million-dollar contract in another state. Mark lost everything. Julian realized Mark hadn't just stumbled into Eleanor's life. He had hunted her. And Eleanor was his weapon. Julian tried to build a case, but without Richard's body or evidence, he couldn't move. The case stalled, and life moved on. On a quiet Sunday morning, a man walked into a small-town diner 2 states away. His clothes were worn, his face thinner, but there was no mistaking him. Richard Pierce was alive. The night of the drowning, a fisherman found him barely breathing. Richard slipped into a coma and didn't wake for months. When he did, he didn't call home. Instead, he disappeared. He built a quiet life far from Willowfield and married Grace Miller, his high school classmate, a widow who had lost her husband 2 years earlier. But eventually Richard came back. Not for revenge, for justice. When Richard walked into the Willowfield police station, Julian Price nearly dropped his coffee. "You ready to put this to bed, detective?" Richard asked. Julian reopened the case immediately. With Richard alive, Mark's alibi collapsed. Julian staged a sting operation. Luke, once suspected, now wired up, confronted Mark in the mall where it all began. "You really think you got away with it?" Luke asked. Mark smirked. "Richard's gone. Eleanor's mine." That was the deal. From behind the monitors, Julian's jaw tightened. Seconds later, Richard stepped out of the shadows. Mark's smirk died. "Not gone," Richard said. "Just waiting." Police swarmed. Mark was arrested on the spot. Mark Rivers was convicted of attempted murder, conspiracy, and the killing of his sister-in-law. Eleanor, who had stood by Mark until the day of his arrest, was charged as an accessory. She testified against him to save herself from a longer sentence. And Luke Pierce? He walked out of the station a free man, finally cleared of suspicion. As for Richard, he returned home with grace. He never looked at Eleanor again. Detective Julian Price closed the file with one simple line. They called it the Pact that killed him. But Richard Pierce didn't die. He came back to bury them without ever pulling the trigger. Eleanor is serving 5 years. Mark will likely die in prison. Richard and Grace live quietly now, far from Willowfield. But if you ask Julian, he'll tell you this. Revenge doesn't always look like a gun. Sometimes it just looks like survival. What do you think? Was Richard's silent punishment just as cruel as Eleanor's betrayal? Or did he have every right to watch her destroy herself? Comment below. And if you think this is one of the wildest twists you've ever heard, hit subscribe. Because the next story, it's even darker.